we can't just claim to be doing what they're doing and do it smarter or more clever or rely on this sort of storytelling. We have to come up with something fundamentally different. We're trying something quite orthogonal, something more ambitious, more challenging, and of course also risky. But that's what you want your startups to be doing, taking these big moonshot bets that can really upset the field and deliver something unique. I'm of the firm belief that we as hardware people have this duty to build it. And if we build it, they will come. AI is definitely going to help quantum computers be useful faster. I stand on the point that I'm yet to be convinced that AI is fully capable of replacing the creativity of the human brain in the short term. To me, it's interesting to what level we'll actually have a democratic response to these things and to what level they'll be decided amongst the tech elite and then the kind of select few.
Welcome to the Quantum Economy Podcast. Today's episode is all about challenging the dominant roadmap in quantum computing and what it takes for a young European startup to compete in a field shaped by billion-dollar players. My guest today is Pavel Hrmo, CEO and co-founder of ZuriQ, a Zurich-based startup creating a fundamentally different trapped ion architecture. Our conversation moved between hardware strategy and core physics, questions on Europe's role in the global race, the convergence of AI and quantum, all the way to the question of whether we are beginning to outsource not only computation, but even understanding itself. If you like the conversation, feel free to subscribe. This is the Quantum Economy Podcast with Pavel Hrmo.
Yeah, so first of all, Pavel, thank you for coming on. I've been having some of the U.S. competitors with the approach to trying to solve quantum computer with trapped ions. I've been looking at various approaches, but today I wanted to have a startup founder that I met in Davos, one of the promising European companies. First of all, for those of you who don't know you, just give us a heads up on what your approach is to tackling scaling quantum computers and what you're working on.
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. But I'd love to tell you more about what we do in ZuriQ. So we're trying to tackle the challenge of scaling the sheer number of qubits that you can pack into trapped ion systems by evolving from what was very traditionally a one-dimensional architecture to a two-dimensional architecture. And there's a particular innovation that we bring to the game in the sense that we change how we trap the ions themselves. So traditionally, all the other companies in the market and most of the research groups as well have restricted themselves to just trapping ions with only electric fields combining these charged particles in vacuum. And this has led to the fact that when you solve the physics equations, you end up with very one-dimensional systems. That means the ions can kind of move left and right, but they can't go up, down, and in the other dimension, right? And this is a bit challenging when you want to build a system that is scalable and also dynamically reconfigurable. So our innovation is to combine the cutting edge and microfabricated chip processing with a different mechanism to trap ions called the penning trap, which combines electric fields with magnetic fields. And when we have these two fields combined together, we get rid of this symmetry that forces the ions to only move laterally, and instead they become more easily reconfigurable in 3 dimensions. And this gives us an avenue to really build scalable two-dimensional grids of trapped ion systems. So for those of you who are familiar with, for example, neutral atom quantum computing, where you see these big, large two-dimensional grids of atoms, we're trying to bring that flavor into trapped ion industry, which is for a long time working these kind of long one-dimensional chains of ions. And our firm belief is that this is the right way to get to the really large number of qubits you need for utility scale quantum computing.
Well, that's interesting, though. I mean, you could look at Pascal, which is also a European competitor in that field. But I mean, you're up against some heavyweights. I mean, IonQ and Quantinuum, and they have very deep pockets. And when you say innovation in the field, what makes what do you think ZuriQ can compete? Because I mean, you're a young startup, and obviously the funding circle, even though you're raising money and you're building the company, How can you? Is there like a very unique IP you think you have that you could tackle with?
So there's a few ways to look at it. And the first thing I would suggest is that with the utmost respect to Quantinuum, I believe they're working from a blueprint that's by now over 20 years old. It's well established that what they're trying to do is a very challenging prospect, and they've spent a lot of resources to make it work. And I'm continuously impressed at just how much they're making it work with every successive generation of computer they release. I think it's really impressive. But I do think that if they just keep going down this exact route, there will be bottlenecks that can prove challenging as we really try to increase the number of ions by orders of magnitude while retaining the same kind of structure or architecture that they're currently working with.
Yeah.
So starting a company now in Europe, like you said, with the fact that we're behind, with the fact that these companies have had a large amount of money poured into them, means that we can't just claim to be doing what they're doing and do it smarter or more clever or rely on this sort of storytelling. We have to come up with something fundamentally different. So what really I viewed ZuriQ as is it's offering an alternative architecture that might simply grease the wheels on this kind of scalability path, right? It might be a much more direct way to have a large amount of qubits in your system compared to these approaches. So what Quantinuum have done, what IonQ have done, is really show that trapped ions are an extremely powerful platform. They've demonstrated a full toolbox of quantum operations. Oxford Ionics has added an extremely high level of quality of quantum operations into the system. That's why IonQ acquired them. And in some sense, what Oxford Ionics has done for the quality of qubits, we want to do for the quantity of qubits in the system, right? Maybe that's the analogy to look at of how a small European startup that focuses heavily in R&D and developing core IP around it can still succeed in the presence of these much larger giants. Because they're kind of following this one roadmap, and we're trying something quite orthogonal, something more ambitious, more challenging, and of course also risky. But that's what you want your startups to be doing, taking these big moonshot bets that can really upset the field and deliver something unique.
Yeah, but that's the argument, though. I mean, trapped ions are very good for quantum error correction, and then if you look at scaling the qubit number, you will have advantages when you go larger. If I listen to you correctly and understand correctly, you look at the quality of using ion traps, then you have a better chance of running the quantum error corrections, and then to scale once you get to a large number of qubits. Is that your approach then, to dumb it down to a layman's term, to say that like where Quantinuum and also Oxford Ionics, they've been struggling engineering wise, but also in terms of the laws of physics to build these computers, and you come in with a more lightweighted approach where you're then going to increase the number of qubits and tackle the advantages of trapped ions with the error correction. Is that kind of sort of the same, the reasoning?
Yeah, I would say that it's about getting the right architecture that enables you to do more with what you have. So, for example, just think classical computers. Initially, we had transistors, and we tried to keep shrinking them down, achieving a larger amount of a density of computational units per unit area, and that was how we kind of sped up computing. That is part of the story, and it's also what we want to do. We want to create denser arrays, because our architecture with this large magnetic field allows us to kind of compress the size of the features on our chips to allow our qubits to be more tightly grouped together. So we can actually pack more computational power sort of per unit area. That's one of the arguments. The other is that the architecture also matters, right? Again, you can draw analogies to classical computers, and at the risk of being kind of a very hand wavy, you can argue that CPUs and GPUs, they're all just transistors, right? It's all the same classical compute power, but they're kind of different architectures, so different computational ways. And in that same sense, what we want to do at ZuriQ is just unlock a new architecture that allows you to extract more out of what you have. And we do that by offering this reconfigurability into dimensions that is much more efficient than the way that it's done currently, right? So that means with the same exact constraints, the same quality of gates, the same rate of shuttling the qubits, keeping everything constant, just by changing the architecture, we can already attain much better scalability. So that's, let's say, the argument for why we want to try out something so radically different. And, maybe going back to your earlier question, what is like the moat, or I think the thing is that no other research group that I know of at the moment has actually tried these sort of approaches. So we're kind of the first ones to dive into this open blue ocean, swim around and start finding the best things where we can start digging that moat, the best patents, the best approaches. And we have a kind of head start here, just like they have a head start in building the whole compute stack, right? So I think it's going to be an interesting race, and, we're more than happy to be part of it.
That sounds really cool. So how do you see that stack up against superconducting qubits and also photonics and other approaches? What makes you believe that the scalability of your approach is better than approaches outside of trapped ions?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is something that every trapped ion physicist will tell you. We're really proud of our qubits because of the fact that they're high quality. They're not manufactured, right? The fact that every single atom of a particular element is identical to every other atom of the element universe is really powerful, because it means that the errors you incur on your qubit are simply due to how you control them rather than inherent in the qubit manufacturing. So I think that's a key building block. And then it's how well do you control them? How do you induce your errors, right? And we know that the world is noisy. We know that these qubits can decohere, and we need to mitigate these errors. And ultimately, what you want to add is error correction, right? And I think what ions have is that they have this sort of sweet spot where they operate at rates where you can actually interface with classical systems that can extract the classical information necessary to make an error correction decision and still feed back on the system within the coherence time of these quantum operations. So I think they're very well suited to be logical qubits. And the other prerequisite to be very logical qubit is that you still keep the error threshold, or so let's say the physical error, very low, right? And I'm going to mention this again. I think this was the real success story of Oxford Ionics, but also Quantinuum has very high 2-qubit gate fidelities today, even with laser systems. So it kind of shows you that you can engineer a lot with these qubits, and you're starting from a really promising angle. And now the question becomes not, are these high quality qubits, but how do we get very many of them without compromising on that quality, right? So just showing that you have the best gate fidelity with 2 or 4 or 6 ions isn't enough. The question is, if I now have 1,000, will I retain that fidelity such that all the assumptions I had at the beginning don't break down? And I think to some degree, that's still an open question at all the platforms, right? Hence why everyone's still getting funding. There's still confidence that many different technologies can win. And I don't want to sit here now and talk very negative about the others. I think that everyone's got a lot of pros and cons, but this is the reason why I like trapped ions, because we have such a good premise that even if we have to relax 1 or 2 assumptions in the future, I think there's enough things that we can work on that we will get there with the future error correction that we can implement.
Yeah, what do you see then as your main challenges? Is it an engineering task? Are there big engineering tasks? Or do you see it simply that there is a mixture of, or are there even physical challenges that you have? Or is it just, capital and growing? Well, how do you see that?
I oftentimes people say, look, we're commercializing and now it's engineering and the physics is done. We're kind of reversing that a little bit, and we're saying, oh, no, the physics isn't done yet. I think there's actually some interesting physics that being leveraged. And the key distinguishing factor here is that we're at this really large magnetic field, right? And that changes the structure, the atomic structure of our qubits compared to what our competitors have. So, obviously to most people, this is like, oh crap, this could be a challenge, right? But I also see it as a big advantage. It simply means that you have a bigger richness of the landscape of this sort of qubits you have available to you. And now it's up to you to think also clever in the physics applications, how you can you can figure out different approaches to control these qubits. So I see it kind of as it's a double-edged sword, and you have to learn how to, use the correct edge to your advantage. I think that's the way to think about it. So coming back to the analogy, right? We have jumped into this blue ocean. No one's explored it. Maybe there's a shark or two on the way, but if we can get rid of those guys, we can actually really accelerate and leave people behind if we can find the right ways to use these machines. So it's always going to be a mixture of engineering, but now we're in some sense we took a step back in order to take 2 steps forward, right? We needed to do something radical and orthogonal to be appealing, I think, because like I said, there's no point challenging people with $2 billion in their bank account just by trying to do what they're doing, but better. So yes, I think we have a bit of physics ahead of us and also about 90% engineering still, but that 10% can be very valuable in identifying uniquenesses that make our system better.
That's an interesting. I'll come back to that later and how that converges with AI models and how now the part of physics and in particular the whole field of theoretical physics, how that radically changed now. So but I would be curious to think about the economical implications here. If you look at your number of qubits, the thresholds for real economical impact, because I mean, one thing, as you mentioned, you have 2 billion in your bank account, but also in US as the European startup, you need to scale, you need to raise money. Where do you see this or I would say all these approaches having real economical implications and also benefits that you could measure against?
Mm-hmm. So I think we need to also leverage what we're good at in Europe, right? I think in the US, you can get a lot of capital, which then allows you to try to do everything in-house. You aim for vertical integration. You want to become a behemoth as soon as possible. IonQ's obviously doing that strategy. Now they most recently acquired their own fabrication with Skywater. I think in Europe, we have to play the game differently. And what we do well is collaboration, ecosystems, some level of public funding support. And that means our strategy as a startup has to be a bit different, right? Can't come out of the gate and say, look, we're going to build a full stack and just do it all ourselves, trust us, and give us all the money. Instead, we want to partner with the right people. And we have some amazing capabilities. For example, just next door, we have Infineon making very good chips for trapped ion systems. So in fact, the first chips for ZuriQ were manufactured in a collaboration with them, and we're already trapping ions in these chips. So as a big personal, I would say, point of pride is that when we designed this brand new system and got these chips delivered from Infineon, within 2 days of installing this completely new chip, we immediately trapped ions, right? And oftentimes, when you build a completely new system, these things are measured in weeks, if not months. So it shows you the level of maturity you also have on the fabrication side to be able to deliver a chip that we slot in our role as system integrators and can immediately get to trapping ions and doing the hard physics and compiling new algorithms, etc. So I find that impressive, and I think this is the right way to do it, to play the game a bit differently. Find the right partnerships and start connecting the dots between the people who can really be excellent at each layer. I think these partnerships are going to be crucial.
Yeah, I like that. But then the question pops to my mind, what does a mature quantum stack then look like, and who owns it? I think that's also a big question in terms of the power. I mean, if you mention Infineon, I mean, that's a big player and it's a solid contribution, but, are you a supplier of, niche products within that stack, or how do you see that, a mature quantum stack evolving?
Yeah, no, I think you're right that, things are different in this sort of low volume, high value era. You sell a few machines at low volume, but I really expect things to be different when the market is more mature and you're actually selling a much bigger bulk of devices on premise. There's a massive demand for cloud computing. You can really start increasing the production rate. And I think then you're going to start seeing a quantum ecosystem the same way a classical ecosystem exists, right? NVIDIA is a great example. It's also a fabless company that designs architecture, but ultimately the chips are made in Taiwan. The operating system has nothing to do, let's say, with the hardware, right? You have Microsoft. They're not necessarily building any parts of the computer. The CPU vendors, Intel, also do different parts, different crucial parts. You have the motherboards, again, built by different companies. So in classical computing, you began to see this specialization at many different levels. Now, because quantum computing is not as mature, people still make full stack bets because they think that what's more important than anything is just to be the first to demonstrate a real massively impactful quantum application that's going to start making tons of money. And I see it happening, but even if you get to that point, it might be that in your stack, you have big gaps. And this layer could be so much better if you just work with this partner. So I think even if someone does win with a full stack solution, it's not inevitable that they will snap the whole market and there won't be segmentation to work with, again, best players at different layers in that compute stack.
But is it even, I mean, if you look at how conventional CPUs, GPUs are performing and how you keep getting additional performance, you will have new energy approaches with fusion, you will have solar, you will reduce the cost of energy. Conventional compute is becoming insanely good at a lot of these things that could have been quantum use cases. Do you have like a qubit number in mind, or like a time frame where you say that now quantum computing will actually have a real economic impact?
Look, I'm not the applications expert. I'm of the firm belief that we as hardware people have this duty to build it. And if we build it, they will come. And by they, I mean the collective brains of the software engineering world, which now we're just harnessing a tiny, tiny fraction of. Coming up with new quantum algorithms, new applications is very difficult. It's not as easy as, programming a Python script. And that means that you need to reach a critical mass of devices that are powerful enough that people see the opportunity to completely pivot their career and go full on quantum. And I think you allude often to AI, right? And I think there's this anxiety in society, and especially in the compute science, that, look, AI is coming for my job, right? Why should I be working for a B2B SaaS company when some guy can go on Unlovable and hack the same thing together by code in 2 days? So maybe the right way to do it is to start getting more people interested in these really hard problems, right? Like coming up with quantum algorithms and quantum applications. But, unless we as hardware people give people the tools to really work with, give them really good qubits, give them logical qubits, I don't think we're going to get there. And so I can, of course, speculate. I can tell you my opinion that, probably in the 100 to 200 logical qubits, we can start seeing the first applications, for example, in simulating molecular properties. I see that as kind of the lowest hanging fruit of the whole endeavor. I mean, that's one way to give an idea, but the other is just really, let's get people motivated to push that timeline forward by coming up with new and new applications. And you kind of see this with error correction already. Like some of the estimates for the amount of qubits you would need to run, for example, Shor's algorithm have already massively dropped simply because of improvements on the kind of software side, right? So we at ZuriQ see our role as first and foremost driving hardware forward such that we can then be the most attractive partners to the best software people in the world.
I think that's a very good approach. And at the end of the day, the use cases will not come on choosing one or the other. You don't even care. You care about compute. So I totally agree with that. And the same goes for security and throughout. I mean, what happens underneath is not relevant. You don't think about the whole applications that run on your cell phone every day. So I think when use cases become economically relevant, then you don't care about the compute. You'll have hybrid approaches. There are probably some scenarios even in analog computing that might be relevant. But I was just curious to see how you see that whole convergence then of AI and quantum. Obviously, hype over the last months, I would say weeks even, and how this evolves. Do you think that some of the challenges that you have will actually be solved by converging AI models or algorithms to tackle even physics to that level? So you will have a very increased rapid progress because you can apply algorithms. So that's something that you foresee. How do you see the convergence of quantum and AI happening over the next, month to years?
Yeah. So I think what's really important to remind people of is that, of course, quantum computing isn't going to make everything faster. It works only in cases where there's a identified quantum algorithm that is going to massively reduce the number of steps to solution compared to the best classical algorithm. Because actually each quantum computation on its own is actually quite a lot slower than classical computers. That means quantum's never going to replace classical. It's always meant to coexist and work together. So I see the convergence with AI, especially in the case where you can have hybrid workflows where AI can still do the brunt of heavy lifting. Let's call it the brute force approach to solving a large part of the problem and then outsourcing the difficult bit. Let's call it the exponentially difficult bit to the quantum computer, who then generates some classical output that then again gets fed to the AI, and they work sort of in collaboration. And that's, let's say, the point of convergence. And why that's important, like, why can't AI just do all of it, right? Because we see AI power growing all the time. And I think that the problem is that you have to think of it on a completely information theoretic level, which says that certain problems are so complicated that no matter how much compute power you throw, even the largest supercomputers of today, they still can't solve these problems because the state space of the necessary variables you can encode and solve for is so large that problem doesn't work with classical algorithms. What AI is good at doing is sort of exploring things that we haven't maybe thought of, making connections, but it isn't something that runs known algorithms faster, right? It's really a different computational mode. And so I think they can work together solving parts of the problem. And this is, again, a question for the future, how to best do this. And I think there's going to be a lot of development and kind of hybrid quantum classical collaboration that will inevitably involve AI.
Well, what do you think enhances the one better? Is it quantum computing will enhance AI, or is an AI enhancing progress in quantum computing?
Let's be completely honest. Like right now, AI is, it is where it is because it's already doing really amazing things, changing daily routines of millions of people, delivering already commercial value. So what I would say is that I think AI is definitely going to help quantum computers be useful faster, if not simply just for making our daily workflows better, but also helping us identify certain architectural shortcuts, things that we might have overlooked. I think AI is definitely helping for sure. I think we are still finding out what are the best ways to use AI for quantum. And this is, again, where the convergence, I think, is a bit nebulous.
Mm-hmm.
But I see AI helping to accelerate quantum for sure. But then in the long run, I see quantum giving back and solving the hard bits that AI can't solve. So I think in the end, it's going to be a symbiosis. But for now, we're kind of definitely benefiting from AI in the short term.
But it sounds like an abstract thought. If you think about it, are we approaching some scenario of end of theory? So theoretical physics is now applied compute and AI, some autonomous scientific modeling of progress. I mean, it seems like the rapid progress, the recent releases of GPT and other models, it's become insanely good at math. It's become insanely good at looking at scientific models. And if you put additional compute to it, it kind of sort of feels like throw data at it and it'll figure it out. And we get to some kind of solved world. I mean, there feels like what is the purpose of I mean, probably your education and the ones that are still doing it. Isn't it that type of radical what we're seeing?
I think here I'm actually not on board with this fully. I think that if you're a completely empirical materialist, I only care about the solution person, you can argue that over time AI will be able to solve more and more things way better than humans can. But I think what's still unique, and to me is as of yet unproven that this is AI is capable of this, is humans' capability to simplify things, right? And simplify it to a way that others will be able to understand that process. So that what I mean by that is often the best physical theories that we have are ones that unite disparate parts of physics and suddenly make complex things more understandable by finding some underlying principle that can be written in a few equations. And that's probably the most powerful thing we've seen in mathematics and physics. With AI, oftentimes you can get the right answer, but the way it's achieved is nebulous. You don't really know kind of what's happening in this black box. You can, of course, ask it sometimes to refine its thinking, show its work, but it's different, I think. And here, I wouldn't give credit to my theoretical colleagues because I think they're not going to be replaced so soon. I stand on the point that I'm yet to be convinced that AI is fully capable of replacing the creativity of the human brain in the short term.
Is it creativity though? I mean, if you look at quantum, so I mean, we can go back to Feynman. We could look at all the great minds of the past. If you want to model nature, you have to do it with a quantum computer. So they have it like the pathway to make models of nature. So what you're saying is we will have AI models that will be put on compute. We will not understand how they get to some kind of result or conclusion. And then we're saying, okay, they're not creative to the sense of making stupid mistakes or coming out of some kind of other approaches. But isn't it so that once we have these models through maybe humanoid robots or some other kind of interaction with physical reality, that the capability, at least in theory, becomes just as prominent as a human being? Where would you draw the line in that type of creativity? Because I'm just wondering if you just start to interact and you have 50 million humanoid robots interacting with the physical reality, built on a model that can simulate on a quantum computer with AI algorithms. What does that even mean when we talk about the term creativity?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I think to some degree you can probably get to a state where a sufficiently powerful AI is indistinguishable from the vast majority of humans. But is it indistinguishable with the totality of the human experience all the way to the final 0.1%, right? Is in some sense, if AI doesn't have a lived experience, right? Can it really learn from also its own little thread that gives its own kind of little ideas to explore, right? I think this is to me unclear. Like you could also throw in the idea of, okay, so it's a big classical computer, and to what degree does our brain leverage, for example, quantum properties and enable any sort of burst of creativity? You can be very Newtonian about this and say everything is just classical physics and a brain is just a series of zeros and ones, and in principle, a powerful enough AI will be like the human brain. And I see that. Without a full justification or a fully worked out thesis, I don't think that's the full story. I think there is going to be some limitation to the ability to come up with certain things.
Yeah, but even if you go there, you look at Roger Penrose, Michael Tuberly, Stuart Hameroff, you can look at quantum phenomena in the brain. You can argue fluffy, wet, not suitable for quantum compute. In the neuron, there could be quantum phenomena, but that's still, when you end up, it's basically saying either it's a part of physicalism and you can figure it out, and it is a part of that compute, or it's something beyond physics. It's some kind of spiritual, godly, whatever, a soul type of thing. So if we stay with that, so one argument could be we are building a faster calculator, processing what we know, or we are approaching a new way of thinking by a magnitude of whatever, because we are applying all the knowledge that we have created onto a computer that, at least in theory, can interact with what we call a physical reality. So here, the argument is there must be a threshold or a limitation on which these computers can interact with physical reality. There must be a realm beyond physicalism. Otherwise, it kind of sort of seems like that a quote-unquote super AGI, quantum-driven supercomputer and AI is much more capable of creativity than a human mind. So I would just be curious, like, obviously there is no answer to this question, but like when you argue this path, what is your intuition? What is it then that is unique for a human being?
I somehow see the fact that these machines are better at synthesis than creativity, and they're much better at putting things together, coming up with an answer, and then presenting it with a almost 100% level like certainty. I guess what they lack is the human ability to doubt themselves and explore because they're unsure of one path or the other, right? I think what AI doesn't do at the moment, and maybe this will evolve over time, is give you like probabilities of or confidence levels in different paths that it took to its solution, allowing itself to go back and re-question its own conclusions over time, right? At least the way we run AI today, we give it a prompt, we get an answer. If we're unhappy with it, we ask it again. But again, it's the human in the loop that's still doing a lot of this re-asking. So I'm with you. I think there is
because it's not good enough. So if you look at so I just had a post on LinkedIn over the weekend, and a lot of the comments are obviously AI, just people prompting in the article and everything. They don't read it, so we become more reactive. I mean, it feels like every argument, every discussion, every legal implication is just prompting, putting it back. Okay, and at least now in theory, there are people that challenge some of the things, maybe clean it up, change it a little bit. But as these models become, even better, the human capability to challenge that, to go back, it's just kind of sort of those, instant reactionisms that we have gotten used to, dividing society on a thumbs up, thumbs down. So the whole capability of thinking, of challenging, of reflecting that we have been trained to do, or we have trained ourselves to do, becomes much more dumbed down, probably because we rely much more on these computers. Mm-hmm. So I think the question is here, I get what you're saying, but is this where we're heading? I see the...
I want to turn this back on you a little bit and ask you, like, what gives you the confidence that when these AI models start interacting with themselves so much, like you already see LinkedIn posts of an AI being replied to by AI, etc., that you don't just devolve and the kind of improvement stalls because you're not getting the feedback of learning from the input of many humans, right? So I think this is partly an argument for why we might see a big stall in the development at some point in the future. And, the kind of classic example of this is when someone takes like an image and says, remake this image, and it does it 200 times. And by the end of it, looks like some goofy, horrible caricature, right? So I think this is obviously a simplified example, but what gives you the confidence that this won't happen when we reach the saturation of AI being everywhere in our society and it's just doesn't have more to devour?
Yeah, I think this is a very valid point and a very valid question. And if you look at an example that I always take, which was a very early example, was the chess world championship final between Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand in India, where Magnus had just played against AlphaZero. So as you know, AlphaZero built a chess computer just by having AlphaZero play against itself 4 million times without any theory or understanding of the game as such. So now, all of a sudden it can beat human beings forever. Now Magnus plays against AlphaZero and picks up a move. And then against Vishy Anand, he plays this move. And the supercomputer that we have, based on our understanding, intuition, theory, our understanding of this game, Magnus plays a big mistake, a pawn move on the H row. And the computer, Stockfish, which is the greatest chess computer man-made, says this is a losing move. And then 6-7 moves down the road, he wins the game. And he is then asked, literally, like, what did you do? Or where did Anand play his mistake so that you caught up? And he just said, well, Anand didn't really play a mistake, but I played an AlphaZero move. And they say, what is that? I don't know. It's just winning. That was his answer. The greatest chess player of all time. So to that point, if we simulate chemistry and materials beyond our intuition or trial and error approach, and we build new elements in the periodic table, and we keep extending that, we do not understand what that means. We don't understand the implications, and we can't get out of the machine the reasoning behind it. So, we are observers of outcomes that we don't get. So we are kind of sort of outsourcing that understanding part. And at least in theory, we then become reactive to something that we don't get. So the intuition that we prompt or add to the machine could be good, but we wouldn't get the outcome, and we would just react or rely on that. That's the consequence of how we are using the systems today. And my reasoning is basically saying that these systems, first of all, with more compute, lower energy cost, more sophisticated algorithms, a different type of architecture where we add world models and foundational models beyond the LLMs, we add quantum computing to it. Even that would take us to a magnitude of a factor of something that goes way beyond where we are today. And then if you then take that and apply that into a learning environment in the physical, or what we call physical reality, it's very easy to go down a train of thoughts to say that this will be insanely more powerful in terms of creation than a human being. And we will become very reactive to that kind of sort of behavior. So that's basically what I'm seeing, agnostic about consequences, but we are outsourcing then the understanding to a machine that don't understand or don't have an agency to understand its own understanding. So that's basically where I see this developing, at least, if you look at recent developments and you would, project that into a future scenario with a quantum computer.
But how do you pull the understanding back out, right? Because if you live in a world where you leverage the bounty of AI and let it just do its own thing, the generations that come after us are never going to understand a lot about what's happening in the world, right? So you lose the ability to course correct anything that you on a societal level want to adjust, right? And I think, we build systems, sometimes bad, sometimes good, political systems, economic systems. We go through revolutions, and we always view this through the lens of progress. We always think everything's getting better and better and better over time, right? But yeah, if you get to a point where everything is so limited in our understanding, then you don't have a chance to do that course correct, right? Because you don't even know what's happening around you.
That's my argument. So basically, we build a world where we messed up, we error corrected because we understood the errors. Now we are building systems where we don't understand the outcome. And as long as we're looking at finite systems in terms of winning or losing or right or wrong, and we're not looking at a deeper foundational understanding of implications, so we're looking to solve problems. And that's what we're doing. We're throwing compute at solving tasks, right? So if we don't understand the outcome of that, that's the exact consequence. So the difference is now, in my view, also philosophically speaking, is that we are moving from a world where we had trial and error and the potentiality to error correct. And now we're moving towards a world where the complexity is beyond our mind. And therefore, we are becoming reactive. So if a quantum computer outperformed classical system in modeling reality, who would we trust? Would we have a human judgment, or would you rely on the machine? What we are already doing today with LLMs is we are relying on the machine. And if you do that and you project that 5-10 years down the road, why would you at all then rely on a human judgment? Because we would never, ever comprehend the complexity of the outcome of this process. So that's, in theory, the consequence of a quote unquote zombie apocalypse, where we just react to impulses and just, are under these powerful machines. So I'm very interested to think about, what does that even mean?
I think you're getting into an interesting topic of blending kind of physical reality with human psychology and the kind of emergent phenomena you get out of it. Because one thing that I'm very fascinated about, it's kind of something I learned about reading a few books, is kind of like the excess of information can actually reduce the capabilities of your decision making. And our body takes a lot of kind of subconscious cues from our environment that allows us to make split-second decisions. And in some sense, AI will never be turning it off. The model is always massive, right? And it's always thinking about everything and all the parameters. And you can even imagine that the human added value will be the ability to filter out and not consider these massive multi-parameter models and still act on these smaller intuitions because we're always going to be limited by how much information we can process. So you can even argue that there is something opposite that might happen, like a counter emergence of utility, because everything is so massive and so interconnected. Every decision the AI is making is considering so many variables that you end up in this sort of average over all these paths that starts to cut down on the number of viable outcomes. You start losing the edges, you start losing the tails of your distribution of outcomes. And that's where the human ingenuity can still kind of cut through. That, in these edge cases, the unique people will be able to do things that, AI sometimes struggles to see, right? And that's maybe your alpha zero move of Magnus.
Yeah, and I think it also depends a little bit if you see the reality as computational reducibility, or if there's always a layer of irreducibility. So David Deutsch's beginning of infinity. So progress is infinitely possible. So if that scenario is given, there is something beyond what we can solve. Then at least in theory, there is room for progress. And then the second layer is obviously, is there a human being, a conscious experience that can interact with this quote unquote physical reality and understand that simplified version that you just kind of sort of outlined, or to challenge that perception of things, right? So there are two dimensions. One is, do you believe in a complete modeling of what we call physical reality, or is there something beyond? And the other one is there a conscious entity called a human being that can interact with this, or do we become like the philosophical zombies, the reactive part of that super machine? And I wrote, so I've written one book about the simulation hypothesis together with my quantum physicist colleague, Florian Neukert. And the last book we wrote was about what we call singularity paradox, basically bridging this gap between humanity and AI in terms of saying that, well, we will never comprehend the complexity of a network of humanoid robots on a quantum computer with all access to compute. So if that is true, and we don't want to become like ants to us, we must become it. So we start with whatever the human factor of things is, the creativity, the intuition, the soul, whatever you want to call it, and we build on top of that, and we become it. So we gain access to a supercomputer, a quantum computer with AI capabilities, alongside being quote unquote human. So we call this artificial human intelligence, where we take that level of inaccessibility of a complete modeling and, at least in theory, assure that that is given. So we take the mensch and we build on top of that. And that is just a different approach than we are doing today, because today we are throwing everything, as you said, into trial and error, into compute, and trying to build better computers. And I think that could be a dangerous path, to be honest.
No, I mean, I think that we didn't even open the topic of dangers, and it was on the tip of my tongue when you were saying, AI is capable of infinite creation. I was going to say also infinite destruction, but I bit my tongue back then. But of course, yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to be worried about.
How do you see that? Do you think that quantum computers are then the public infrastructure, or is it like a strategic weapon?
Right, because it's really not. It's still going to be, I would say, limited to some of the applications with very specific algorithms, and I don't expect quantum to be somehow associated with this. I mean, much more, I think a public debate should be had on AI. Nonetheless, I would say what's important is to also have a discussion about, if we enter the quantum realm, how do we sort of also equitably distribute the outcomes of the successes of quantum computing, whatever that may be, whatever breakthroughs it may bring, right? And, humans always have these debates only after the big breakthroughs have happened. And that's our shut up and calculate mentality as physicists and engineers. And to some degree, yes, I agree. I think we won't understand all the implications now. We won't be able to predict all the consequences. And we will have to, at least for now, just power through and calculate. But having these conversations is extremely valuable by at least setting the stage for what's to come. like seeing where we're headed can, help us course correct a little bit. I hope, at least with AI.
How do you? Is there a fundamental limit to what can be computed? Even with quantum computers, do you think there's a limit?
I mean, yeah, for sure. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can draw energetic limits or thermodynamic limits to what can be computed, right? There's also problems where
What is the energetic limit? I would just push back. What is the energetic limits that you see?
you can try to calculate you always need some sort of energy to perform some sort of computation, right? And this is
Why do you
classic.
see limitation? What is the limitation to energy? I mean, if you have fusion and you have a solar that can be outlet in space, and you have storage, and you have this powerful. I mean, where do you see the limits to energy?
I mean, okay, so now we're getting a bit more futuristic, right, on the practical scale. I was going to go down in a slightly different path.
Sorry for interrupting. I was just curious about the energy.
But okay, I think if we go into the sci-fi route, I want to be an optimist. I think fusion is one of the big promising technologies that is hopefully going to make an impact in the next few decades. And it's something I was always optimistic on, even as a child. I think if I wasn't going to do quantum physics, I was extremely interested in plasma physics, at least for a brief period of time, because I thought, fusion is going to be the next big thing, clean energy and all that. But I think the realities are that somehow there's something very challenging about harnessing this, right? This fusion technology. I don't know when we can get there. But when we do, what's the implication? Do we have unlimited compute as a result of it? And I still think that it's going to be the same problem. You can train bigger and bigger AI with more and more parameters, but it's not obvious to me that some of the problems will become more amenable to it. And especially if you want to encode problems as they are given to you by quantum mechanics, there's just way too many variables, right? You can write certain molecular properties. If you want to describe the full wave function of something that has, 10 to the 23 variables or more, you don't even have the memory to compute it. So the point is that there are actual limitations to what you can even write down to solve on classical computers. But that's not the same as saying that if you have infinite energy, you can't come up with proximate or good enough classical solutions to solve those problems. And this is, I guess, where the limits of my knowledge are, because I don't know how to extrapolate so far in the future to say, look, we can get 99.999% accurate and that's good enough. But I can tell you for sure that there are problems that you just can't solve as they're written down, simply because we won't have the computational capacity at any reasonable time frame to do 100% accuracy, right? And
yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, it just becomes about that solved universe. So if you simulate chemistry, you simulate biology, you simulate climate, you can maybe get the cognition with extreme fidelity and have that brain replica. It's just, I mean, if at least in theory we have enough access to energy, so it becomes a storage and distribution problem. So if you look at the sun, you would have infinite energy, but it's just that, can we solve the engineering? Can we build storage and distribution? And it just feels like even without fusion, that there are potentialities to a magnitude of progress that could lead us to a, kind of sort of abundance of resources type of world. And then, we get down to the core of physics and say, are the limits in terms of what can be computed? So it's just to play with these thoughts. And to me, you called it sci-fi. I don't see the fiction part of it. I see the philosophical part of it. So what should we do and how can we do it? So it's just very interesting to play with, at least in theory, that what would it even mean to have infinite access to energy, right? And what would then be the limitations, right? What are the limitations to understanding biology or chemistry or physics, to that matter, right? So I mean, it's just interesting to play with it, because when you get deeper into the conversation and how you also reacted, right? That's where we have stopped thinking about it. We have, a quantum theory where the underlying foundation is not clear, but we can build magical stuff on top of it. But when we then get down to first principle, then, it becomes fuzzy to say, where are the limitations?
yeah, absolutely. But, just coming back really quickly to reiterate a point about the kind of accuracy, I think coming back to what's coming in the next few years, I think what quantum computing is really going to do to distinguish itself with classical, once it starts getting to the era of logical qubits and really solving chemistry problems, the important takeaway is that it's not necessarily just the speed up, but also the fact that you're solving the equations as they're meant to be solved with the true parameter model fed in. And that means when you get the answer from a quantum computer, it will be accurate. Whereas with classical solutions, like I said now, that you simply cannot even classically compute these problems, we now rely on approximations, right? And oftentimes you don't know how close that approximation is to the truth without actually going and physically testing it in the laboratory, in your chemistry wet lab. And this is now a lot of the resources are spent in these fields. So what quantum computing can really enable is giving researchers tools that give you answers with a very high degree of confidence in the accuracy of these outputs, right? So it's not just that something can take a day instead of taking a month. If ultimately you can trust that result, that is extremely valuable. And I think that's also going to be a big implication of thinking how quantum compute's going to impact the world.
Yeah, 100%. And then we circle back, because then the question becomes, is it to eliminate uncertainty, or is it to better navigate what we call, reality or the world? And that is where I think we need other models, and also the understanding where so maybe we are at the point where coming back to the trial and error that we discussed earlier, maybe there is a much, much bigger responsibility line on what we're doing, because if it's doable, the question is not can we achieve it, but more should we, and in what could be the consequences, right?
Well, I think that's for more important people than me at the moment to decide. But
But thank you for going down those rabbit hole and thinking about like the philosophical implications and the limits.
Of course.
Let's circle.
To me, it's interesting to what level we'll actually have a democratic response to these things, and to what level they'll be decided amongst the tech elite and then the kind of select few. Because, in many ways, AI is a very democratic tool. It allows people to very quickly do things that before were restricted to the domain of experts, coding up a website, making an app. It is extremely enabling to people to speed up and achieve things that were not possible before without, let's say, some level of privilege or startup capital or connections. You can now do a lot. On the other hand, you're still not there at the top, kind of shaping the evolution of the models and the long-term story, like you're saying, the AGI, the energy question, who's answering where the energy will be, who will own the data centers, who will power them. And I think there's a bit of disconnect there where the democratization is happening and who will ultimately benefit from all this, right? So these are questions that, would be very nice to delve and explore more also on a socioeconomic level.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, we start to engineer our reality. It's the question always gets back to, can we model everything, or are we kind of sort of like reaching some kind of limits of what we can do? So is there a limitation? And if not, we should, be talking about how should we put it into society and how should we organize it? And as you said, with tech elite or who decides, these questions are very important questions. But I want to take us a little bit back to the journey of ZuriQ. So just give us a little bit of an insight of what to expect over the next months. Where are you with the company? Are you raising money? What are breakthroughs that you can tell us off record that you're going to communicate? Where is ZuriQ heading this year?
No, I think you should definitely keep your eyes peeled on our website and to our social media channels, because for sure in the next couple months, what we want to communicate is the progress on building these two-dimensional arrays of ions. And linked with that, of course, we're expecting a sort of another round of financing to help us grow with enabling a stronger commercialization of these products. So at the moment, we started as a small team, just 3 scientists, founders coming out of university, myself as a postdoc, 2 PhD students by my side graduating out of the lab of Professor Hrmo at ETH. And the three of us then managed to pull together a nice financing round. We raised 4 million euros, and we've now built a team of about 11 people. Very excellent technical people across the compute stack, for software engineers, electrical engineers, physics PhDs. And together we've already got, let's say, the first demo system working. And now in the coming months, we're going to be putting it through its paces, benchmarking and trialing it. And when we're ready, that's the kind of release you should keep your eyes on. And it's going to be very nice. And it's going to be showing something quite different and unique to what you see in the major players. And I hope that this will also be coupled with rapid growth. We definitely want to increase the size of our teams. If you're all interested, do get in contact. Zurich is a very lovely place to be. And we're a very dynamic and fast-paced team. And it's always fun in our labs.
Amazing. So you think Europe is equipped or positioned to compete in this race?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we're definitely even over-equipped in the talent space, right? We have really good people coming out of university. We're totally not limited by that. We sometimes have an issue with fragmentation, kind of different ecosystems trying to do their own thing. There's always the question of what happens to growth capital at a certain level. I'm very impressed now with the story of IQM, also now announcing they're going to go public through SPAC. I think this is also a really strong sign from the European ecosystem that we have had one major computing player that was this pillar of superconducting qubits in Europe, taking it all the way. And, maybe we can be that player for trapped ions, but I think we will need to somehow consolidate over time. We have very good ion trap companies also across the border, but in the end, there'll become a time where we'll have to work together and learn from each other, pick the right architecture. And I sure hope it's going to be ours, because I think it's the most promising to go all the way.
That's a wonderful way to end it, Pavel. I think we have trapped ion history in Europe. We need to figure out the capital markets. You mentioned we have good talents. Now we need to have vehicles and economical models to gain free cash flow to grow. And I think it's a very exciting story. It's an interesting company that you have built, and I wish you all the best for the financing round. And I'm sure to follow your journey towards following Jan Götz and IQM, and hopefully we'll have the first trapped ion IPO in Europe also in near future. So all the best to you, and thank you so much for coming on and doing this, and also for joining me down some philosophical rabbit hole today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anders. It was very fun philosophizing a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.